I love to read. I love reading so much that I spent over 4 years of my life getting an English literature degree. In fact, during those 4 years, I had to read over 72 books. And I thought, you know what? Let's do a tier list ranking of everything I had to read. For S tier, we have Read It Twice. For A tier, we have Read It. For C tier, we have Read a Synopsis. And finally, for F tier, we have Burn It. All right, I have a lot to rank. So without further ado,
let's get started. First, we're going to start with Ryunosuke Akutagawa's Rashomon and 17 other stories. This is a very interesting read. I really like Rashomon in here, and there's a Akira Kurosawa film based off of Rashomon. So I don't think that this is worth reading each short story, but I think it's interesting enough that you should read a synopsis. Next, we have Kate Chopin's The Awakening and selected stories. The Awakening, it's pretty good, you know, female empowerment and everything. This is a good read. I've actually read it twice, but I don't know, I think it's a little light. I think that it offers a lot of interesting looks into sort of femininity and empowerment, but overall, I don't think that it's the thing that you should spend most of your time on. So I'm just gonna say read a synopsis. Next we have Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Everyone says this book is boring. I didn't think it was as boring as some people would say that it is. I actually kind of enjoyed it. I got through it really quick. And I guess I'm just biased to Nathaniel Hawthorne, so I'm gonna go ahead and say read it. Next up, we have Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. This is a really good book. I believe it's getting a film adaptation sometime soon, but all I can really say is that this is gripping from beginning to end, and it has some very, very poetic moments that really make you stop and think, like, how am I living my life? So I'm gonna say read it twice. Next we have James Welch's Fool's Crow. I love this book. You can tell by how much I've written in it. I've put all of these post-it notes in it. I've written a paper over this in class. I love this book. I love Native American literature in general, and this book is just the epitome of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and say read it twice. Next up we have Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. And this is a very interesting book because it is written in sort of a stream of consciousness style, and even though it might seem very mundane in subject matter, I think just the way that it's written warrants you to read it at least once. So we're gonna go ahead and put this in read it. Next we have Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Yeah, it's a big book, and I don't think it needs to be as big as it is. We all know Stephen King writes just a ton whenever he writes. And while the story here, the base story here is interesting, it is good, I just think that the pacing in it is kind of just not good. And it's got some stuff in there that I have to sit and think, like, why is this in here? If you've read this book, then you might know about that. So I'm just gonna say read a synopsis on this one. Here we have Sam Pickering's Letters to a Teacher. I had to read this for a class that was about literary theory, and our professor made us read this instead, and I did not enjoy it. It's as you can see here, it says it's written by the teacher who inspired the movie Dead Poets Society. I don't think that warrants a read on this. I'm gonna go ahead and put this one in Burn It. Next we have Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. I quite enjoyed this one. I had to read it for an African American literature course, and I kind of really liked this one. I think I liked all the books that I had to read for that course. I think our professor just did a really good job picking out novels to read. So while this one is very eye-opening because, you know, it does talk about slavery, the subject matter might be kind of boring to an American reader just because this is something that, you know, we learn and read a lot of growing up. So I'm not going to say read it, but I am going to say read a synopsis. Next we have William Faulkner's Sanctuary. And if you know about any literary person, they just have the the biggest love for William Faulkner. He's the darling of American literature, and I do think he's a good writer. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't see it. It's American Gothic through and through, but I actually had to read this for our Gothic literature course. I don't know. I don't think the story here is just that compelling. Though I do think he is a good writer. I'm just gonna go ahead and put this one in read a synopsis. This one is a little different from the others because it is a collection of 3 longer, they're not short stories, they're sort of like novellas, so it's a collection of 3 novellas. In this one right here we have The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, Vathek by William Beckford, The Vampyre by John Polidori, and A Fragment of a Novel by Lord Byron, edited by E.F. Blyler. I had to read this also for a Gothic literature course, and for each of these, they're sort of like the beginning of Gothic literature as we know it. So for that reason, I think that the stories are good, but I do think that they can be kind of boring just because they were the first to do it, and sort of the entertainment aspect wasn't hit upon quite yet. And the stories in here are kind of old when you consider like the year that it is right now. I don't know if I like love any of these in right here, so I'm gonna put this one and burn it. Sorry. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, Oscar Wilde, beloved author. We all love Oscar Wilde, and we all love The Picture of Dorian Gray. This is like a vampire story and sort of a tragedy and just an examination of like beauty that only Oscar Wilde could write. This is a very, very, very good novel, and those who have read it will know that. For that reason, I'm gonna put this one in, is it good enough to read it twice? I think this one's good enough to read it twice. Next we have F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I have read this twice, once in high school, once for college. You can read this in a night. It's a very, very short book, and it's a very good book. It's very influential. It's quintessential Americana. Is it that good though? I don't think it's as good as everyone says it is. We're gonna put this one in read a synopsis. Though you probably have already read it if you go to school in America. Next we have Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written by Frederick Douglass. This is sort of a memoir written by Frederick Douglass, sort of detailing the earlier parts of his life. I think it's pretty good. Because it is autobiographical, there's not really a lot of entertainment to this. It really is just by the numbers. It's a narrative of his life, and it really can't be that much more. I do think it was an interesting read though, so I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next we have Coming of Age in Mississippi by Anne Moody. This is also an autobiography. This is a good book. Like, this copy right here is well over 400 pages long, and I remember reading this, I was gripped from beginning to end. This is just, I don't think enough people have talked about this book. I'm very glad I read it. I'm so glad I read it that in fact, I'm gonna put it and read it twice. Next we have Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. This is, it's about writing. This is sort of about how to write. It's not fiction, it's sort of instructional. There's some good stuff in there, don't get me wrong, but I mean, could you not just do research elsewhere to get the same information? I don't know. I'm just gonna put this one and read a synopsis. Next we have Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. This is a really, really good read, and it's not something that I would probably typically read. It deals with religion and homosexuality. It's a very modern take on those sorts of themes. I loved this book, and I loved discussing it. I think this book is so good that I think you should go and read it right now, and I think that you should read it twice. My darling, Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. This is a book that I have read twice, and I enjoyed it both times. I enjoyed it better on a second read, And Ernest Hemingway, he's a very problematic author in that he has some very outdated masculine perspectives, but just the way that Ernest Hemingway writes, I think a lot of people could learn from. He's very sparse, he has a very brief way of writing, but it's so effective and it's so powerful. So much so that I'm just gonna say, read it. Here we have William Blake's Songs of Innocence, and this is a collection of poems, and not just a collection of text poems, they're actually scans that he did on these illuminated manuscripts. William Blake. My professor that this course was taught by was obsessed with William Blake, and so obsessed that I kind of started to hate William Blake. There's some good stuff in here, don't get me wrong, but just the amount of time that we spent reading William Blake, I can't do it anymore. We're gonna say burn it. And would you look at that right there? Songs of Experience by William Blake. Burn it. Next, we have the story of the Bayeux Tapestry, Unraveling the Norman Conquest by David Musgrove and Michael Lewis. I had to read this for early medieval European history class. It wasn't even a literature course, but we had to do a lot of reading in it, and this was one of the books assigned. This is a good book. If you don't know anything about the Bayeux Tapestry, detailing the Norman Conquest, I believe it was 1066 is when this happened, but just sort of, this goes around the origins of the Bayeux Tapestry. It goes section by section because this is a really long tapestry, and just like a very compelling read all the way around. I'm gonna say read it. Next we have Walt Whitman's Complete Poems. This is all of Walt Whitman's poems, and I have read, I don't want to say all of them, but nearly all of them. There's a lot of repeats in here because there's several different versions of some of his poems that were published at different times, but Walt Whitman, he's an American writer. He's the American poet. And I don't know if we could say read it or read a synopsis because there's a collection of poems here. So I'm going to say read a synopsis, and by that I mean just pick out some of the top Walt Whitman poems and give them a read. You don't have to read all of these right here. So we're going to put them in read a synopsis. Next we have Green Grass Running Water by Thomas King. This is another Native American novel, and this is a very postmodern Native American novel. So if you like postmodern literature, you'll like this right here. That being said, I did not enjoy this one all that much. There's some cool stuff in here. It plays around with a lot of literary traditions, and it sort of turns a lot of things on their heads. It's fun, don't get me wrong. It's occasionally funny, but I wouldn't say that it's the best novel that I've ever read, so I'm gonna put this one in read a synopsis. Next we have Mary Oliver's A Poetry Handbook, a prose guide to understanding and writing poetry. It's a poetry handbook, read a synopsis. Next up we have The Rule of St Benedict. This is about Benedictine monks. It's the Rule of St Benedict. I mean, it's how ascetic monks would live. I also had to read this for my medieval history course, and it's a very quick read, though not one that's particularly very interesting. I guess if you like monks, it's cool. We're just gonna say read a synopsis. Next up, we have Anne Radcliffe's The Romance of the Forest. This is another entry into the Gothic genre. I went in wanting to like this one. It's so boring. It is so boring. we're gonna put this one in burn it. Here's a good one. We have Storyteller by Leslie Marmon Silko, and just the format of this one, it's very square. It sort of challenges that traditional Western binding. This is a collection of Native American tales that are sort of spun around and they're put into modern context, and there's some stuff directly from Leslie Marmon Silko in here. This has some really good bits in it. I don't know if it's so good that we would read it twice, so I'm just gonna put this and read it. Next we have So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba, or the French title I believe is Si longue une lettre. It was originally published in French. I know that. I didn't read it in French though. It's a good book. I enjoyed it. It's relatively short. You can get through it pretty quickly. I wouldn't say that I loved it, though, so we're going to put this in read a synopsis. Next, we have good old Nathaniel Hawthorne's Selected Tales and Sketches. I enjoyed this, I would say, slightly more than the Scarlet Letter, just because it's a collection of short stories. There's some really good stuff in here. You have Goodman Brown. I think too many people sleep on Nathaniel Hawthorne, so I'm going to put this one and read it. Next, we have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison, quintessential Black American author. She has a way of writing that is just straight up mesmerizing. It's poetic. You have some weird stuff in here. I don't know if it completely gets into postmodern literature territory, but it's veering close to it. This is a sad book. It's an eye-opening book, and I think it's one that you should read at least once. Next up, we have James Weldon Johnson's The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. This one is called an autobiography. It's not an autobiography, which is kind of confusing when you're first reading it. This book is entirely fiction. This one might give you pause when you're getting through it. There's some stuff that'll make you do a double take, but I think it's intentionally written so. I don't think it's good enough that you need to dive into it. So I'm just gonna say read a synopsis. Next up, we have Peter Straub's Ghost Story. I also had to read this for a Gothic literature course. It's over 500 pages long. I did not enjoy this book. I don't remember anything about it, and I think that's just because I don't think that this is a very good book. So I just remember it was kind of weird. I'm getting vibes from it, weird vibes from it, so we're gonna put this in Burn It. Next, we have Tracks by Louise Erdrich, or Erdrich, I can't remember exactly the pronunciation on that. This is another Native American piece. I remember when I first started reading this, it's a very difficult text in terms of sort of character motivation and narrative structure. And when I first started reading it, I didn't really like it. But by the time I got to the end of it, and the more we discussed it in class, and the more I picked it apart, I wrote a paper over this. I liked it so much, and I wanted to interact with it so much that I decided to write one of the papers in that class over it. So I'm going to say read it. Next up, we have The Penguin Book of Vampire Stories, edited by Alan Ryan. It's a book of vampire stories, and I don't think there's any in here that are particularly good. Burn it. Next up, we have Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. This is a very, very short book. You could probably get through this in a night. Leo Tolstoy, Russian author. I haven't read any of his other books, though I do have Crime and Punishment. No, that's not Tolstoy, that's Dostoevsky. Yeah. No, I don't have any other books by Tolstoy. This is the only Tolstoy I've read. It's an examination on sort of like life and death. But it's about classism. Is it good enough that you should read a synopsis? Burn it. Sorry. Here we have The Picture of Dorian Gray. I don't know why I have two copies of this book. So we're going to put it in the same one as the other one. Read it twice. Next we have House Made of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday. This is a good book. You know, I'm saying that about all the Native American literature here, but this is a good book. It's about as dense as it gets. My entire class hated this book. I loved this book. My professor considered taking it out for the next time that he taught the class, and I literally had to go up to him and say, please do not take this book out. Because I am so glad that I read this book. It's so good. So we're gonna put it and read it twice. Next we have The Book of Job. Doesn't have an author because it's a product of oral storytelling tradition. You could put the author as God, I guess. We're gonna say it was written by God, even though that's not even remotely accurate. I had to read this for, I believe it was like a world literature class, and it was more just to examine the tradition behind storytelling. It's the Book of Job. I don't think the story of Job is very interesting beyond a religious context. With the context of early Christianity, I think it's an interesting read, but I don't think it's interesting enough that you need to read this entire thing. So I'm gonna put it and burn it. Is that gonna get me? Are the Christians gonna come after me for that one? I said I liked it, kinda. Ugh. Next we have There There by Tommy Orange, another Native American piece of literature. This one is a bit more recent. Can't remember exactly when it was published, but it was sometime within the past 20 years, I believe. The narrative here, it was published in 2018. The narrative here is good. The characters are interesting. I just think the style of writing just didn't really click with me. And it has a lot to say about sort of identity and what it means to be a Native American in sort of the modern day, in a modern context. We're going to put it and read a synopsis. Next we have American Folktales and Songs by Richard Chase. There's some stuff you might recognize in here. There's some stuff you probably won't recognize in here. I had to read it for a folklore class. I don't think it's good enough that you even need to read a synopsis for it. You might even know some of them, so you don't even need to read a synopsis for this. So we're gonna put it in Burn It. Oh ho ho! Next we have Bram Stoker's Dracula. I recently saw Nosferatu by Robert Eggers in theaters, and that's a good movie, and it's literally just Dracula with all the names switched around. This is, it's written in the epistolary style, so it's written in like letters and telegrams, and like everything's dated. You can sort of like read day by day, like throughout the year. This is a good book. Like Dracula, it's that fin de siècle, it's that turn of the century novel, sort of going into the 1900s. And I think that this one is so good that you should read it twice. Next we have Ghost Stories of an Antiquary by M.R. James. This is a collection of ghost stories, and I think that some of them are meant to be a little campy, some of them are meant to be a little sort of silly, and they're not like scary. I don't know if there's anything that's particularly scary in here, but they're fun. Like, these are just like fun little sort of horror short stories. I had to read this for my Gothic literature course. Just read a synopsis on this one. Next we have The Stories of English by David Crystal. This is about linguistics. It's like the origin of sort of the English language as we know it. I had to read this for History of the English Language course, and if you're a fan of language, I think that you'll really like this one. There's just something so interesting about linguistics and sort of like the origins of our words, how we speak, how we communicate. I'm a little biased here just because I love linguistics. I'm going to say read it. Next we have Bread Givers by Anzia Yezeriska. That is a Eastern European name. I don't think I pronounced that right. It's like a family like living in a tenement in, I believe it's New York City. I had to read this for an American history course. It was good. I don't think it was amazing though. I'm gonna put this one in read a synopsis. Next we have My Darling Child, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This is my favorite book of all time. I love this book. I love this edition of the book because when the book was first published, that was censored. It was a very controversial book, so there was a lot of it that was censored, and sort of this edition highlights everything that was censored, and it gives you a brief explanation as to why it was censored. Moby Dick, man. It's got a silly name, but this book rocks. This book is so good. I could sit here for days on end picking apart this book, and I would still have more time to love it over 3 times, 4 times, 5 times over. I would say, if I had a section here that would say read it 20 times, I would, but I don't. So we're just gonna put it in read it twice. Next we have The Black Death, The Great Mortality of 1348 to 1350, A Brief History with Documents by John Aberth. This is just a collection of maps and documents detailing how different people throughout Europe reacted to the Black Death. It was pretty interesting. You know, there's a lot of accounts in here that are sort of religiously motivated, that are culturally motivated, so you have to do a bit of analytical reading with this, but I mean, if you're interested in history, you know, it's The Black Death. I'll put this one and read it. Next we have Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Shiguro. It's a contemporary cyberpunky book. It deals with identity, what it means to be human, your typical sci-fi future concepts. The main character is Clara, who's a robot, like a service robot. It's kind of like Detroit Become Human, if you know that video game. It's a good book. It has a good story. I just think the writing was a little simple I have other novels by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I might grow on them more, but for now, I'm just going to put this one and read a synopsis. Next, we have the MLA Handbook 8th edition. If you've written papers in the MLA format, this thing is indispensable, but annotated bibliographies, I hate them. I know how to do one, and I know how to do one really well. I hate them. Burn it. Is that the MLA Handbook 9th edition? It's the 8th edition, just worse. Just more stuff that you have to do. And they change things around. Burn it. Next we have Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. I'm gonna be real, I don't remember much of this one. Yeah, I don't remember much of this one. Burn it. Next we have Joseph Heller's Catch-22. This is a funny book, and this is a good book. Like, this book is so good. I would put it up there with Moby Dick just on like how good it is. It's about this guy who is like a fighter gunner, an airplane gunner, and he's going on these terrible missions, and he has to fly so many missions until he's done, but they keep on upping the number of required missions. You can get out of those missions by claiming insanity, but by recognizing that you are insane, by claiming insanity, you're not insane because you have the mental faculties to know that you are insane. So that's the Catch-22. And like Catch-22, we know what that is. It comes from this book right here. So I'm gonna put this one and read it twice. Next we have Nathaniel Hawthorne's The House of the Seven Gables. I've read this one twice. Once for a Gothic literature course, once for an American literature course. This one is not as good as the Scarlet Letter. I think it's about sort of like ghosts. There's some really good chapters in here, like there are individual chapters that are really good. I don't know if it's amazing, though. We're gonna put it and read a synopsis. Next we have Faiz Guen's Kif Kif Demain. This is entirely in French. Oh, I have a little cute little postcard in here. I'm gonna put this up off to the side. I didn't know that was in there. But yeah, this one is entirely in French. It's pretty short. I enjoyed it. I guess I would say like read a synopsis. I don't know if the synopsis is gonna be in French or not. So we're gonna put this and read a synopsis. Next we have Why Write by Mark Edmondson. This was a book that was assigned for my senior colloquium, and it's going over several different reasons on why people write. Why is it that we as humans write, and why does that matter? So I guess it's very interesting in that it talks about like history of writing, but it also gets into sort of the philosophy of writing. I enjoyed this one quite a bit, and sort of it's very important to me in that I'm a writer myself. So I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next here we have the selected writings of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, we love him. We read him in high school. We read him in college. He's a good writer, and he writes good horror, sort of like gothic short stories, right? We know him for that reason. He also wrote a lot of cynical essays and poems. The Raven, probably the most understood poem in the English language, along with The Road Less Traveled by Robert Frost. The Raven and The Road Less Traveled. Those are the two most misunderstood poems in American literature. The Raven is a very like cynical sort of like a lampooning of like Gothic writing at the time. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be hokey, but I think a lot of that is lost. The way that we read that today. Some really good short stories in here. Igea is one of my favorites. So I'm not going to say read everything here, but I'm going to say read a synopsis on some of them, and read a couple of the short stories. So we're going to put this one and read a synopsis. We're getting close to the end here. We're not quite there, but we're getting there. Next we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Everyone loves this book. I thought it was boring. As a piece of feminist literature goes, it's good. I just don't think it's as good as everyone says it is. Read a synopsis. Next we have The Color Purple by Alice Walker. If you've seen the movie, you'll know that this is a really good story, and it deals with sort of like queer themes. It deals with femininity, sort of toxic masculinity, and like what it means to be a black woman in the South. It's good. It's a good novel, and it has like this interesting theme of like voice, the human voice throughout, and like I think it's very special in that way. I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next we have the book that like I The way that I interpret this book is the way I think that people interpret Pride and Prejudice, as this like just amazing masterpiece, and that is Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. This is a really good book. This is like 10 times better than Pride and Prejudice, in my opinion. Like, I think this book is so good. Like, I love Jane Eyre as a character. I love Mr. Rochester as a character. The ending of this novel is just insane. I'm gonna put this one and read it twice. The next two that we have are not individual stories, and they're not short stories either. They are the Norton Anthology of Shakespeare, edited by Stephen Greenblatt. This is the later plays and poems, so you have his sonnets, you have King Lear, you have Antony and Cleopatra, The Winter's Tale. I love Shakespeare. Everyone's like, Shakespeare, he's so boring. These stories and these plays become so much more compelling when you watch them. And I think that that's a big failing of the American education system, is that they make us read Shakespeare. These plays are amazing if you listen to like an audio performance of the play, or just watch the play in general, because so much more gets through when you hear it spoken and performed. I think more people should enjoy Shakespeare. I'm gonna put this one and read it. And I'm gonna go ahead and put the early plays and poems in Read It as well, for the same reasons. This one includes his historical plays. You have Comedy of Errors, Romeo and Juliet, Much Ado About Nothing, Henry V, Julius Caesar. Read it, watch it, listen to it. So that concludes all of our prose literature. I have a special section set aside right here for comics, because I took a sort of a comic course, and we just read comics, and it was my favorite. It's my favorite class aside from my Native American literature class. A lot of these are probably going to go and read it. I'm gonna guess that right now. First off, we have Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, a Family Tragicomedy. This is sort of an autobiography, more of a memoir, I guess, because it doesn't cover her entire life. It only covers aspects of it. This is a good comic. Alison Bechdel, amazing author. She has a massive vocabulary, and that'll really come through while reading this right here. This is a really good comic. I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next we have Brian Fye's A Fire Story. This is the story of just a dude whose house burned down. There's a lot of things that you don't really think of when it comes to home burning down, and sort of like the toll that takes on you. It's a very good memoir. I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next we have an adaptation of Paul Auster's City of Glass. Sorry about the big U sticker. I couldn't get it off because it's going to peel off the cover. But this is an adaptation by Paul Karasek and David Mazzucchelli. You'll recognize Mazzucchelli from Daredevil Born Again and Asterius Polyp. This is a really good adaptation of City of Glass, I would say. Very confusing, very eye-opening, deals with language. I'm going to say read it twice. Next we have Relish, My Life in the Kitchen by Lucy Knisley. This is a very cute comic. The art in here is great. There's like little recipes that are sprinkled all the way through. It sort of just like deals with life, all of its like mishaps, what it means to like grow up with food. It's cute, and I love the art, and I think it's just a fun story to read. So fun, in fact, that I'm gonna put it and read it twice. Next we have The Borden Tragedy by Richard Gary. This is the story of Lizzie Borden. I was not familiar with Lizzie Borden before reading this right here, but apparently it's a well-known, like a true crime story. And this sort of like is a collection of all of the accounts. So it's like a true crime comic, and it sort of like goes into what could have happened, the events leading up to the murder, sort of the layout of the house that they were living in. If you really like true crime, I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next we have one of my favorite comics, just because the art is so good and the writing is so fun. We have The Ankle by Jodorowsky and Mobius. Mobius is an artist, and Jodorowsky he's a director, but he's also like did some comics. I love The Ankle. It's weird. The base for this comic is Jodorowsky was working on an adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, and the budget was becoming so overblown, and they were taking too much time on it, and it was so wacky and weirdly conceptually. So they put all of the ideas into this comic right here, The Ankle. This is a good comic. I'm gonna put this one and read it twice. And next we have Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. This is the textbook of comics as a medium. Like, if you are just getting into comics, this is the book for you. And I think Scott McCloud just puts everything so plainly, and he describes everything so well, and it's not just prose, it's a textbook about comics that's written in the comics format. And that's just so much fun. I'm gonna put this one and read it twice. Next we have Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba's Day Tripper. This one, it's like a meditation on life and death. The art is really good. It's following the story of this guy who's an obituary writer. It's just his entire life, basically. And I don't know. I don't think I enjoyed this one as much as some other people did. It did read an Eisner Award, it says on here, for Best Limited Series. I'm just gonna say read a synopsis on this one. Next we have Joe Sacco's Severia Garajda, The War in Eastern Bosnia, 1992 to 1995. This comic is the definition of harrowing. There's some really graphic stuff in here. This one's, it's really good. It's tough to get through because of how graphic it can be at some points, but you shouldn't just stray away from things because they make you uncomfortable necessarily. I mean, sometimes maybe you should, but like, this one's important. We're gonna put this one and read it. Next we have Felipe Melo and Juan Cavia's Ballad for Sophie. It's a simple story, but it's very cinematic in the way that it's paced. It sort of reads like a movie pretty much, and you can get through it in a night, sort of like a movie. It's like that simple of a read. The art in here is really good. The writing is really good. It's not perfect, but it's entertaining. It's very entertaining. Though I will say, the copy that I received, the binding is just atrocious. And I know for other people in my class, their copies were also just falling apart. Kind of unacceptable. It's kind of bad. But that has nothing to do with the content here, but I'm gonna put this one and read it. Next we have Mouse by Art Spiegelman, A Survivor's Tale. The art here is really good. It's biographical, it's like a sort of biography and autobiography. It's good. It's really good. And I think it's so good that you should read it twice. And finally, we have Black Sad by Juan Diaz-Canales and Juanjo Guardino. Sorry if I mispronounced those. This is a collection of, I believe it's 3 Black Sad stories. The art here is really good. It's like if genre had a comic. Like, this is like a detective noir. It's like Batman without the Batman. You know, it's sort of that like hard-boiled sort of detective mystery type deal. The art is really good. The stories are really fun. And I think you should read it. I think you should at least read like one Black Sad story just to see if you like it. So we're gonna put that in and read it. All right.
Thank you for making it to the end of this video. Believe it or not, this actually isn't everything that I had to read for classes. There are still plenty of books that I did not purchase to keep, and there's a lot of content that was provided digitally by professors. Please let me know in the comments if you think I am wrong about any of these rankings, or leave another comment if you would like for me to do a closer look at any of these books. That's all I got for you today. See ya.